Being back into making Terraria content has my brain working overtime on new ideas. In today's video, I'm going over a list of changes and additions I would add to the 1.5 update if I was in charge of its development. Quality of life, custom music, ambient monoliths, shocking additions, wiring changes, a new biome, bosses, and more lie up ahead. So let's jump straight into it. Greetings friends, Khaios here. I need to emphasize that nothing in this video is actually in development. This is not a sneak peek into the next update. This is simply my wish list for things that I would love to see in Terraria. And yes, all of these are made from the perspective of a builder, so I don't have things like weapon and balance changes. That's not my area of expertise. If somebody at Relogic happens to see these suggestions and wants to add them, great. If a modder decides to do it instead, also great. And if nothing comes from this video, at least you all know what I find interesting for future updates. These are going to range from small things to massive things. I'll try to present the things that I think are more likely first and save the pipe dream for the end. But that pipe dream, the biome that I have in mind, well, I actually got a concept artist to make visual representations for it, so stick around to the end of the video so you don't miss out on that. Let's start off with an easy example of something I would like to see in the game. 1.4.5 added the ability for chests to pick up items on wire activation. However, we have no way of sorting these chests or determining what can't go where. If you were to put 50 individual items in a chest to try and take up all of the spots in the hope that that chest will only pick that one type of item up, when it's activated, it automatically sorts itself, stacking all 50 of those items into one. In the next update, I would love to see a way to make filterable chests. Either do it so chests don't automatically sort items on activation, or you could possibly add an extra inventory slot like this. When you place an item into that slot, the chest will only be able to pick up items of that specific type. Either of those would be a great solution for even more organized farms. And on the topic of chests, I wish we had something more akin to actual hoppers in Minecraft. This would be a 2-wide block that we could place under a chest to automatically drain items from that chest. A wire signal would toggle it on or off. The items could then be passed to another hopper if they're placed in a chain, placed into a connecting chest, or they could be spat out on the floor if we had something similar to a Minecraft dispenser. This would allow us to create a storage area away from our all-in-one crafting area with a bunch of programmed switches to input what we want to craft. The hoppers would drain items from our storage area and carry them to a chest in our crafting area, which we could then craft directly from. Afterwards, any remaining items in that chest would be drained from the crafting area and sent back into storage. It would be amazing to have the capability to make more techie builds that move and dispense items. Another big quality of life addition that I think wouldn't be too hard, but would add a new item that would make building a lot easier, would be something I would call the Hammerator. This is very similar to the grand design, but with block slopes. We could set a slope shape, then drag it over blocks to get the shapes that we desire. It would be especially useful for landscaping and building hoiks. No more needing to click on your hammer 1,000 times for a single build. Now with the smallest changes out of the way, I want to dive into some of the bigger ones. But before I do that, if you love the content I've been pushing out and you would like to help support the channel directly, you can become a supporter on Patreon or right here as a YouTube member for various rewards, such as access to my Discord server, my video schedule, world downloads, and even your name in the credits of my videos. Every dollar goes to help keeping the channel going, and it is greatly appreciated. And if you'd like to help support the channel in a free way, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to help boost this channel with the algorithm and make sure that you don't miss any future content. You all are truly amazing, and I can't thank you enough. Now, let's talk about some of my biggest environmental ideas. Monoliths? Really? That's my first big suggestion? Yes, and let me tell you why. A building can look amazing, but the right environments can make them far better. It's like a movie. The build is the film, but the environment is the soundtrack. What would Star Wars be without its music? The same goes for our builds, so I'm suggesting a big list of monoliths that I feel would really take our builds to the next level. First off is a massively requested monolith in the community, Lantern Knight. Normally, these guys show up at night after defeating a boss for the first time, and they look amazing. True, they provide a luck increase, but who cares about that? We're talking strictly about appearance. It's been highly requested in the community to be able to have these lanterns on a monolith. Of course, they would be visual only, and they wouldn't provide luck. The second monolith that I want to suggest would be the Ectomist monolith. One of my favorite ambient features in the game is the fog that the graveyard creates, but I don't always want the desaturation, darkness, flashes of lightning, and the enemies. I just want the fog. This monolith would simply bring us that fog effect wherever we want it. That isn't the only weather environment that I'd love to control. Up next would be a series of weather monoliths. Sometimes I just want to be able to control the weather at the flick of a switch. There would be monoliths for rain, snow, wind, and thunderstorms. The thunderstorms would provide lightning without rain, or the graveyard, while wind, rain, and snow would provide those effects. Much like how the celestial monoliths override each other, we wouldn't be able to have rain and snow at the same time, unless Relogic really wanted to get crazy. Seeing as how weather is on a slider, as we could see in journey mode, I would have monoliths for 33, 66, and 99% weather effects. So for the rain monolith, there would be a drizzle, a full rain, and a monsoon. The same goes for wind, snow, and thunderstorms. There would also be a clear weather monolith that would hide any real-time weather that might be happening in the world. Instead of having 3 monoliths for each weather type, I would only have rain, snow, wind, and thunderstorm weather monoliths. Each of those monoliths would start at 0%. When activated, they would go to 33%. Activating them again would bump it up to 66, and a final activation would bump it up to 99%. At which point another activation would drop it down to 0. This works similar to how the Aether monolith has multiple states. Weather monoliths would give us so much ambient versatility. That way, a build could be a rainy thunderstorm while the rest of the world is bright and sunny. Since these are monoliths, they wouldn't actually change any of our spawns or drops. I would love to see time monoliths, so that we could have builds that sit perpetually at specific times of day and can even be changed via wiring. These wouldn't actually cause us to get different spawns, so zombies will still spawn at night even if the day monolith is on and it makes it appear like it's daytime, and so on. These would also override each other, so we can't have day and night at the same time. There would be 4 time monoliths, similar to the buttons on our journey mode setting: dawn, noon, dusk, and midnight. And it would lock the sun and moon positions at those times as if time was frozen. Speaking of the day-night cycle, we already have a blood moon monolith, which allows us to visually have a blood moon at night, but also during the day. I think it'd be great to get a solar eclipse monolith that does the same. Another great monolith that I think we could play with would be a heat wave monolith, which just brings the heat distortion of the desert or the underworld to anywhere you want it. The last few monoliths that I would love to see would be biome monoliths. They would allow us to have the backgrounds of different biomes, no matter where we are. We could have the forest, desert, jungle, snow, crimson, corruption, hallow, beach, space, or the underworld, all on a switch. These wouldn't affect our drops, obviously, they would be appearance only. And those are all of my proposed monoliths, which alone could drastically change how we build in Terraria. But the next item I want to propose will do even more. I have a musical background, and one thing that I love doing in sandbox games, if that game allows it, is to transpose music into it, like I used to do with Minecraft. So something that I feel like Terraria would benefit from would be the addition of note blocks. We have lots of ways of customizing in this game, but music isn't one of them outside of just installing resource packs. Being able to make music in-game would be amazing, but we could also use them for sound effects and more. With note blocks, we could even build a walking piano for players to jump on. Personally, I would love to add custom music to my builds, which was one thing that I absolutely love to do in Minecraft. If we could do that in Terraria, this is one of my longest running dreams for the game. But how exactly would it work? A note block would simply be a 1x1 tile that produces a sound when it's activated via wiring. This sound would be heard a few hundred tiles away to give us more space to build music boxes with and hide them away. By default, it would just make a click sound like hitting the rim of a snare drum. In order to get different instruments, I'm going to borrow inspiration from how Minecraft handles it by giving 2 suggestions. In Minecraft, a note block will produce a different instrumental sound depending on what block is below it. We could potentially do something similar with background walls, but that would limit how our builds look with music boxes. So I think a better solution would be to add an item that I call note filters, which would sit on the wiring layer. When a note block has a note filter over it and it's activated with wiring, it would produce the sound based on that filter. So for example, if you had a piano filter, the note block would go from making a click sound to making a piano note. But a single note doesn't make music, so how do we handle that? The hammer. We hammer blocks to change their state all of the time, so we could hammer a note block to change what pitch it produces. Each hammer would make the note block produce a half pitch higher, going over 24 semitones or 2 full octaves. If they really wanted to be ambitious, I'd even like to say 3 octaves, but any amount would be great. So by getting pitches with the hammer and setting note filters, we can get a wider range of instruments and sounds to make music with. As for instrumental filters, I would give 14 options, to include the piano, bass, violin, xylophone, bell, harp, flute, trumpet, French horn, because that was my instrumental focus, snare drum, bass drum, a bit note, guitar, and banjo. I just think that's a wide array of instruments that could be very versatile. Of course, if we have note blocks, we'll need silence, so we need a silent music box to turn off any background ambient music. This would work like any other music box in the game. Put it down, turn it on, and instead of playing a soundtrack, it would remove a soundtrack. So that's how note blocks work, but what about rhythm? In Terraria, wiring just sends out a pulse, so if all note blocks are activated at one time, how do we actually make music? Every note would just play on one button press. And right now, the only ways of delaying a wire signal that we have are by using logic gates, timers, and traps. But the next segment of this video will bring some wiring suggestions that would simplify how we do wiring in Terraria in the same way that the addition of logic gates did. Building off a note block, as I said, our next biggest issue is creating wiring delays in order to make rhythm in music. I have 2 wiring devices in mind that could really help with this: the diode and the inductor. The diode would function like a junction box, but it would only allow wiring signals to be passed in one direction. Hammering it would rotate it. So if it's set to point to the right, wiring inputs from the left would carry those signals only to the right, and not to the top or bottom. And signals coming from the right, bottom, or top would do nothing, because it could only send signals to the right. So it helps us better control the direction that wire signals are sent or received, which means we could line up music boxes and even have some overlap with wires without triggering note blocks that we don't want triggered. The second item is the inductor, which is kind of like a timer, but different. Timers, when turned on, will repeatedly send signals on a clock until they're turned off. Inductors would do something similar, but it would only send one signal at a time. So if a 1-second inductor is activated, 1 second after it's activated, it will send a signal out, then turn itself off. We could technically do this right now with timers and logic gates, but this just compresses it all into one tile. Just like with timers, there would be quarter, half, 1 second, 3 second, and 5 second inductors. So while both the diode and the inductor are technically doable in the game already with logic gates, this would allow for a far more simplistic addition for new players. By combining diodes and inductors with note blocks, we could easily make the music that we want to hear. But that's not the only wiring update I want to suggest. Another huge wiring addition that I would love to see would be called an echoator. This would essentially allow us to apply or remove echo coding on a single block via use of wiring. Echo chambers show all echo-coded materials at once, which could be helpful, but it limits what we could do. Echoators, however, would actually just toggle a single block between the echo state and the normal state. How is this useful? Combining them with actuators and moving platforms. You could have a statue build that looks like it's walking in place by changing which blocks are or aren't visible at a time. You could have entire builds and adventure maps or minigames that can change states via wiring by making blocks appear out of seemingly nowhere without having the echo chamber show any of the hidden secrets. Anything that could be echo coded could have an echoator on top of it. I think how we produce wiring signals could also use some love as well. We have weighted pressure plates and sensors for players, but not for NPCs or projectiles. It would be great to have weighted pressure plates and sensors for more than just the players. It would also be pretty handy if we could just hammer logic sensors to rotate their detection range. And on the topic of pressure plates, if we could place them on background walls, it would be immensely helpful. Another wire signal that I would love to see would be a block update sensor. It would be an item that when placed sends a signal to a block anytime the 8 spaces around it receive an update. For example, if you place a block near it, if a block is removed or swapped, if a block is actuated or painted, if a chest is opened, if furniture is activated, or anything of the sort, the sensor would detect the update and send a signal out. It would also be amazing if a few older pieces of furniture could send wire signals, like target dummies when they take a hit, or special types of chairs or beds that could send a signal when you sit or lay in them. One last thing that I feel would be amazing would be to build an item that sends a signal when it's struck by the new lightning that was added in 1.4.5, which leads me straight into the next segment. Lightning strikes are a very impactful addition to the 1.4.5 update, but I think we can make something more out of them. I would recommend lightning rods. The base version of the lightning rod would simply attract lightning strikes that happen on screen to hit it instead of anywhere else. This kind of already happens with trees and metal blocks, but this would be a dedicated item that looks nice. If there are multiple lightning rods, lightning would choose one at random. This would not only help keep us safe, but we could then use lightning as a weapon by directing where it strikes, and I would suggest a second form of it called the chain lightning rod. When one of these are hit by lightning, if there's another lightning rod within 10 blocks of the chain lightning rod, it will shoot electricity to that nearby lightning rod, creating a chain effect that damages anything in between. In order to keep things from going too crazy, however, the jump will only happen one time. We won't be able to set up 10 chain lightning rods and make a wall of electricity from a single strike of lightning or anything like that, though that would be cool. The third type of lightning rod would be a signaling lightning rod. Simply put, when this gets struck by lightning, it would send out a wire signal. Nothing too extravagant, but it would be extremely helpful for wiring during lightning storms or when it's hit by another source of lightning, which I'll talk about in the upcoming segment. And if all of those are a bit much for several items, I could see them being compressed down into a single one that has all of those features. Lightning is fairly rare, however, so do we really need this? Would it have any consistent use? Well, if we combine them with an item that I call the Stormcaller's Tablet, which automatically calls a thunderstorm and is a rare drop from the Angry Nimbus, we could get thunderstorms when we want them, and it would give us another reason to farm for that enemy. Or we can combine lightning rods with the next segment for something even more interesting. I want to talk about traps now, and branching off of the theme of the last segment, the first trap that I want to talk about is the Tesla coil. When activated, it would pick a random location nearby and create a lightning strike between the Tesla coil and that spot, causing the normal damage that a lightning strike would do on wire activation, also hitting everything in between. If a lightning rod is nearby, it will always target those over any other spot or creature. Since it's pretty powerful, it would have a long cooldown timer just like boulder statues do. Speaking of boulder statues, I would love to have one for every boulder type. Why? Adventure maps and minigames. These boulders are absolutely amazing in adventure settings. However, being able to only use them once is not that great. If a player dies, then the trap is broken and they could just progress through the adventure and it's not really fun. I would love to build a ghost house with goulders that spawn, but I can't really do that with how they currently work, because eventually they'll run out of ghosts. The biggest issue from boulder statues of the other boulder types is that they can be used to get infinite resources, and they do a fair bit of damage. Well, we could simply nerf the amount of damage that boulder statue boulders do to enemies, but what about renewable resources? For example, the poo boulder statue would give us an endless source of poo block. But that's a very simple change. Enemies spawned by statues already change their drops. Boulders can too. Poo boulders that are spawned from the statue could simply not create the blocks. Spiders from the boulder statues would not drop items. And the webs that spawn behind that boulder, maybe they're just temporary and they break themselves after a few seconds. It seems like a pretty easy fix. Since boulder statues hang from the ceiling, this makes me think that it would be very handy to put cannons on ceilings or walls even. Cannons, portal gun stations, all of them. It would be very helpful to have more options on where they could be placed and how they could be aimed. The next trap I would love to see would actually be amazing for farming. It's called the bomb trap, and it explodes in the range of a bomb on wire activation, breaking all tiles within its range except for itself, and it would have a fairly long cooldown. There could also be an explosive trap that does the same thing on the range of a placeable explosive. These could be amazing for adventure maps, but also for block farming. And they also play into the next segment of this video. I could spend all day long giving block and wall suggestions, but I'll keep this relatively concise. Going off of the last suggestion of a bomb trap, it would be great if we had blast-proof blocks and walls. Not only would these not be destroyed by explosives, but they would actually shield anything on the other side from the explosives as well. Let's use a dirt bomb as an example. When the dirt bomb explodes, it travels in all directions. However, if there's a line of blocks next to that bomb, the dirt will not be placed on the other side of the block. Essentially, the explosion doesn't travel there. Blast-proof blocks would do this to all explosives, and the walls would simply be immune to destruction from explosives. This would allow us to use explosive traps in farms while directing the explosion and keeping ourselves and our builds safe. The next block suggestion would actually be two new types of conveyor belts. Sticky conveyors, which would be made from normal conveyor belts, and honey. These would not only slow down entities on top of them like honey would, and carry them along like a conveyor would, but they would also be able to carry NPCs and players upwards like normal conveyors can now carry items. Secondly, I would suggest conveyor platforms, which work exactly like conveyor belts do. However, they are platforms, so they only push items and entities from the top side of them, and you could jump or fall through them. Another block that I would love to see is Living Sunfire block. This is essentially a living fire block, however, it produces sunlight. What does that mean? At noon, it is as bright as you being able to see outside. But at night, it's dark, just like you're outside. In fact, I would love to see an entire set of sunlights, to include things like torches, candles, candelabras, lamps, lanterns, and so on. A little off topic, but sun coating would also be great. It would work the same way that illuminate coating does, but it would follow the daylight cycles, and it would darken at night. All of these would be amazing for building indoor or underground. Lightning Cloud would be a new type of block that looks similar to Lava Cloud, but with lightning instead of lava. It could also occasionally zap you if you're standing on top of it. On the topic of clouds, this isn't a new block addition, but rather a block change. It would be amazing if we could now toggle off snow, rain, or lava clouds with wiring. The clouds look amazing and are very helpful, but the particles they produce are ugly as sin. They're so distracting and off-putting. In fact, I would change the way these particles look entirely, because I wish rain clouds produced the actual rain that we get from the real weather effect, same with snow. And it would be great if lava clouds actually produced a lava rain, rather than whatever the heck this eyesore is. But enough about blocks. Some furniture that I would love to see would be placeable vanity pets and summon pets, like we can with placeable critters. I would also love to see a massive increase of the number of critters that we have, and the ability to catch larger critters like dolphins so we could use them on our builds. The invisible mannequin can be a mannequin that doesn't have a visible body, but can still equip armor, weapons, and mounts. The equipped items would be seen, only the body of the mannequin wouldn't be seen unless you're wearing Spectre goggles or if you're using an echo chamber. I would also expand the Rebel Maker to include things like Plantera's bulb, bee larva, dig toys, and the huge dragon egg. Most of those are pretty straightforward, but to get the Plantaris bulb, I would suggest using either life fruit as they start growing at the same point of progression as the bulb, or maybe something like Plantaris mask or trophy. The Graveyard Fog machine would be a furniture item that creates graveyard fog similar to my Monoliths suggestion, but in a more localized area, causing it to form only over blocks within a small range. This is because I love ambient particles, which brings me to the last suggestion of this segment. I call it the particle emitter. The Rebel Maker allows us to place decorations, the Mighty Tidy gives us stalactites, and the Portable Kiln gives us pots. The particle emitter would do the same, but for particles. You would place a different particle emitter depending on what material you have up next, and you could cycle through options like you do with the other tools. These would place a single 1x1 tile that produces particles. This tile sits on the wiring layer, so it can be placed on top of any block and wall, and it would only be seen with wiring items in hand. In terms of what particle it produces, the sky is the limit. Carrying smoke block could allow you to place chimney smoke particles. Carrying a music box could allow you to place music notes. Carrying a bubble would allow you to place the drowning bubbles that you get from being underwater. Having a bubble machine would allow you to place the colorful bubbles from the bubble machine. If you place a particle emitter while carrying Hellstone, it would create the sparks that it had. A minecart could create minecart sparks. A fishing rod could make those little fish that show up. Flower seeds could give us insects, poo block could give us flies, and so much more. Literally any particle in the game could use the block or furniture of that particle to create the emitter for that particle. Now, there is a lot in here, and I would never expect to see all of them, but I would definitely like to see some of the most used particles in the game added. Now, I want to end this wishlist video with my biggest and best suggestion yet. For this final suggestion, I actually worked with my channel artist MythicalWater, who is technically a professional concept artist, to help bring my biome vision to life. The swamp would be a wet, dark area of the world covered in toxic water with patches of swamp grass and a thick, dangerous swamp mud that constantly tries to consume you. The area is covered in a dense layer of fog, making it harder to see, similar to the graveyard. In fact, this biome would also act as ectomist for graveyard crafting. The biome is home to a new tree type, the mangrove tree, which would provide us with mangrove wood. That would also have an entire set of furniture to match it. The biome would also feature plants like thorny bushes or duckweed, which is a type of grass that grows over the swamp water. Fallen logs, moss and mud-covered rocks would cover the area, and remains of the undead could be found decorating as well, like hands sticking out of the mud. Here, we could also find things like gas geysers, which are the surface version of geysers that we find underground that produce a poisonous fog. Water in the swamp would affect us differently than it does in other biomes. For example, in the snow biome, when you touch water, it will chill you. In the swamp, touching water will give you the poison debuff, so you actually want to avoid it at all costs. Jump or build over those small swamp puddles because they could quickly become lethal, especially when we combine it with swamp mud. Stick to dry land like stone and grass. Swamp grass is a sickly green grass that spawns swamp enemies and grows swamp thorns. It'll grow over dirt or swamp mud blocks. Swamp mud is a new and deadly type of block. When standing on the block, you will sink into it as if you're standing in cobwebs. Moving will negate that, allowing you to walk over the block, while standing causes you to sink into it. This block is unique in that it doesn't actually have collision with the players while they're standing still, but it does when they're moving. If a player's head enters a swamp mud block, they start taking suffocation damage. Moving again will help cause the player to climb out of it, giving collision again and allowing the player to slowly walk over it, as if they're on honey. They can try to jump out of it, but it would be like jumping out of the liquid honey. The block is solid to projectiles and liquids, allowing only non-moving NPCs and players to pass slowly through it. As for the mangrove trees, in addition to the wood that they would drop, they could also give us the living mangrove wand and mangrove leaf wands for more tree options. The swamp is home to the swamp hag, an ancient witch NPC that lives in a rotten wooden shack built onto a rotten living mangrove tree. She, like the old man, is a non-hostile NPC. In fact, you can visit her and buy things from her using random items in exchange rather than coin. Her inventory is always seemingly random, and what she wants from you makes as little sense as what she provides. However, if you anger the hag, you will have a fight on your hands, starting a boss fight that would be similar to a pre-hard mode version of the lunatic cultist. But she's not the only manner of creature we have in this swamp. Toads and fireflies are critters that you might find. In terms of enemies, leeches can spawn in the water. These will attach to your body and give you the bleed debuff when you contact them. Swinging your weapon or taking fire damage will get rid of them. Mosquito swarms are another blood-sucking enemy in the swamp. These swarms of insects will look similar to the flies that you find flying around a poo block. They're not hostile until a player gets close, at which point they will swarm the player and cause a small amount of damage and a bleed debuff. The entire swarm would be treated as a single enemy. Angry toadstools are the mushroom versions of the gardenums that we find in Terraria. They spawn in the swamp and they attack the player aggressively. If you lead them out of the swamp biome, they'll turn to stone and become a decorative item. While the gardenum provides a passive good luck to nearby players, petrified toadstools would provide the same amount of bad luck. Swamp slimes are a more dangerous daytime enemy as they cause poison damage on contact. Bog zombies are enemies that can spawn day or night. They spawn inside of swamp mud and we don't actually see them at all. Like the mimic, they are non-hostile until the player approaches. When a player gets near, the bog zombie will jump out of the swamp mud, surprising and attacking the player. Since swamp mud is a solid block to projectiles, you can't simply shoot the floor to hit sleeping bog zombies, making them quite an interesting threat. At night, we get mud golems coming to life. But here's where things get even more interesting. In hard mode, we get mud abominations, a hard mode upgrade to the mud golem, which throws toxic sludge as well. We'll also get hag spawn, which are faster and more deadly versions of bog zombies, moving about the same speed as a blood zombie, and mud sprites, which are green glowing poisonous elementals that fly around at night and attack players. There's also a new hard mode boss, but first, before we get to that, I need to pitch an early game mini boss. When we go around the world chopping down trees, nature gets very angry at you. On occasion, a treant might show up and attack you and chase you away from the trees, protecting them. The treant will have an appearance that matches the type of tree that you broke when you spawned it, and it will slowly walk towards you and slam the ground with an attack. But it isn't too hard to deal with, dropping a fair bit of wood when it's defeated. But this leads us to the hard mode upgrade. When chopping down mangrove trees in the swamp during hard mode, instead of getting a normal treant, you would get an undead treant. A long, dead tree person that has been brought back to life by your destructive actions in the swamp, once again coming to defend the world from you. This massive treant stomps on the floor, causing a large amount of damage. From a distance, it spawns swarms of ravens to attack the player, while it throws balls of toxic sludge from the swamp. It can roar and spawn a bunch of bog zombies from the swamp mud. It might not be the fastest boss, but it's basically a master of the elements and a summoner of its own, and it will use the forces of nature against you. And that's the swamp done. It's not every single idea that I have for Terraria, but these are all of my favorites, from chest sorting to monoliths to note blocks, wiring changes, blocks, furniture, traps, particles, as well as a new biome and new bosses and mini bosses. Obviously, these are just my suggestions, and as I'm a builder, I don't have things like weapon balances or the like in here. And furthermore, the likeliness of us getting any of these directly into Terraria is probably pretty low. I just have a lot of people asking me what I would like to see in the game, so I thought I'd make a full video out of it. I have the full list of suggestions linked in the document in the description below. If you all liked my 1.5 wishlist, help boost this video by leaving a like and a comment, and subscribe to tell the AI overlord that I'm doing a good job. And who knows, maybe Relogic will see this and agree. And if you'd like to support the channel in a more direct way, don't forget to check out Patreon, linked below. A special thanks to my biggest supporters for the month, Kasu and Slathazar Porb. And an extra big thank you to MythicalWater for helping me with the swamp concept art, and for all of your hard work with my channel art. Be sure to check them out, linked in the description below. Thank you all very much for watching. Be back soon with a new video. Happy building!